What happened to the current UKIP leader? Emily, tell us.
It's interesting, isn't it, listening to Nigel Farage, if he represents that idea of hard Brexit, and if UKIP is representing that idea of hard Brexit, what has happened to the man who represents UKIP now, or at least who wanted to, in this coming Parliament? Paul Nuttall, the leader, stood to be an MP in Boston and Skegness, and you can see what has happened to the UKIP share of the vote there. It is down 26%. Now, there may be personal reasons, this may be an individual one, but we know from looking at this that Paul Nuttall was not the choice of voters in Boston and Skegness. Does that suggest that there is less of an appetite for UKIP's idea or ideal of hard Brexit? Let me see if I can pull up some of the other places where we've seen that drop in the UKIP vote. OK, when Douglas Carswell resigned his seat of Clacton, he said UKIP, job done. Perhaps it's a sign of their success. But when you look at this here, and you can see how the vote has been split between Labour and Conservatives, as if UKIP voters are not entirely sure which party to go to or to go back to, the message is clear. In Hartlepool, in Sunderland South, in Newcastle Central, and I can bring up more of these, UKIP is taking a big hit, down 17%, 16%, down 11%. It suggests that voters are now looking to another party to enact whatever kind of Brexit they thought they'd voted for.
Emily, thanks very much. Emily there with some thoughts on the what's happened to the UKIP vote. I said earlier that John McDonnell for Labour was saying that they'd like to put themselves forward as a minority government. That's something I want to discuss with my guest here. Also, Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Conservative leader, saying just a short while ago that a Labour leadership election would be a catastrophe. It would plunge the UK into a crisis. He was telling our columnist back with us. Gus, first of all, can we just nail this one on Labour? Could Labour be in a position within this configuration to form some kind of minority government? How would that work?
So basically, the formal position is Theresa May, as Prime Minister, even if she'd lost this badly, could still carry on and go to the House, try and get a Queen's speech through, and then lose, as she would in those circumstances. Then she goes to the Queen and says, I can't do it, someone else. Now, I suspect what will happen this time is she has the votes to do it. Yeah. Therefore, the situation won't arise. I'm afraid Labour doesn't get a chance in those circumstances as long as she wins that vote in the House. Yeah. That's the key.
Crucial point. On the issue of the Conservative leadership, because then that's the adjoining point, if you like. Yeah. And your thoughts here on Ian Duncan-Smith, of course, who had a pretty torrid time as leader himself.
He knows all about Conservative Party leadership. Now, if the Conservative Party could move in a kind of mature, disciplined and brisk fashion to a new agreed leader, that'd be one thing, but they can't. It will be an absolute bun fight. Boris will not be able to restrain himself in any way at all. He'll be leaping in, people will be leaping in against him. Brexit will be back up for the fight. It will be long, it will be brutal, it will be bloody, and it would be, as Ian Duncan-Smith says, catastrophic for the country.
It's interesting, though, because we've been waiting for some reaction from Conservative MPs, and there hasn't been all that much so far. Ian Duncan-Smith coming forward, and it makes me feel that leading Brexiteers like Ian Duncan-Smith, of course they don't want a leadership election, they want to shore up Theresa May and her position, however weakened, because they're worried about that Brexit timetable. And I think they will have made a calculation that the best way to keep Brexit in their mind on track is to keep her in place and to shore up her support. If there were to be a leadership election at any time, it would be a bum fight, and Brexit would look, as we have been discussing, would look at risk in the way he would like to see it.
Anything from Boris Johnson so far?
No, I haven't seen anything from Boris Johnson.
Philip Hammond?
And no, and all eyes will be on Boris Johnson, because of course what happened after the referendum
and
the
Davis
election. And no, nothing from David Davis. Now, these are obviously key people. They will be waiting, they will be keeping their powder dry. There will be conversations going on writ large in the Conservative Party at these higher levels to see strategically what can be done.
If you want some sense of what an extraordinary event this general election has been and how everything is unprecedented, Boris Johnson is saying nothing.
And that in itself is unusual. Since the last interview I heard with him, he was told to... Yes.
The time is 8:31. We're going to just take a break because we're going to catch up with all the news. It's an update for the news where you are.
Hello, you're watching BBC World News. I'm James Menendez, live at Westminster. With almost all the country will have a hung parliament. The Prime Minister Theresa May has lost her overall majority, despite repeatedly telling voters during the campaign that she offered strength and stability. Her Conservative Party remains the biggest in the House of Commons, but has lost ground to the Labour opposition. Well, some European leaders have expressed concerns about what impact the hung parliament may have on Brexit negotiations. Talks are due to take place in 10 days. The German member of the European Commission, Günther Oettinger, says it could get in the way of coming to an agreement. Speaking to a local radio station, he said we need a government that can act. With a weak negotiating partner, there's the danger that the negotiations will turn out badly for both sides. I expect more uncertainty now. Well, his French colleague Pierre Moscovici said Mrs May lost her bet and that the truth is we don't really know what the governing situation is this morning. But he said the 2019 timetable for leaving is non-negotiable. Well, while Finnish politician Alexander Stubb tweeted, looks like we might need a time-out in the Brexit negotiations. Time for everyone to regroup. Let's go live to Brussels and talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Katya, what are you hearing then? Are people in the corridors of power of Brussels rubbing their hands with glee or shaking in their boots?
Neither, actually. Neither rubbing their hands with glee nor shaking in their boots. Very key. They didn't want it to happen. They wanted the UK zone to deal with a multitude of things it wants to get on with. And Brexit, it wants to get out of the way. So those negotiations were slated to start on the 19th of June. Could they be delayed? Yes, they could be delayed, but this would come as a request from the United Kingdom. This is not a Brussels decision. Brussels is feeling very confident. It has had now almost 12 months to prepare for the start of Brexit negotiations. It has issued very detailed draft negotiating papers on very key issues, and so it says it wants to start as soon as possible. In this morning here of unknowns, one thing is known for sure, and that is the clock is ticking. The UK triggered the formal Brexit process back in March, and that means it only has until March 2019 to get its exit deal, never mind any talk of a future relationship with the EU, including trade.
In terms of the EU's negotiating position, Katya, I mean, is that strengthened by this result, by Britain having a hung parliament?
As from the EU perspective, you know, what we were always told is they wanted to have a secure Prime Minister in place in the UK. The reason being that they wanted a Prime Minister in place who could sit through all the negotiations, who would know their mind. Because if there's a weak Prime Minister in place, well, what does that mean? It means there could be lots of U-turns in the negotiations, a Prime Minister who's beholden to smaller groups within their party or outside that party. That's not good for the UK, it's not good for the EU either. Both sides, EU and UK, would benefit from a good Brexit deal and a good future trade agreement. A weak Prime Minister in the UK makes the likelihood of reaching that deal within the time frame available a little bit more wobbly, a little bit more unlikely. Again, in this morning of unknowns, nothing exactly is clear. But what the EU would like to have is, they say, we've got a very strong position, we'd like a Prime Minister and a government in the UK with a strong position so we can get to business in a clear line.
Katya, many thanks. That was our Europe editor, Katya Adler, joining us live from Brussels. Well, with me here at Westminster, Joan Hoey, who's from the Economist Intelligence Unit, the regional editor of that, and also Stephen Barber from London South Bank University. Very good to have you with us here this morning, down outside the Houses of Parliament. Joan Hoey, what do you think this means for Britain's Brexit process? We're hearing there might be a delay at the UK's request. What's it going to mean for those negotiations?
Well, first of all, I think there'll be some schadenfreude in the EU. I'm sure Mr Juncker is dancing with joy at, not that they particularly care about who wins or how, but I think just the political turmoil and chaos, that's what they will enjoy.
But in pragmatic terms, is that actually going to make the negotiations easier or in fact harder?
I don't think they were ever going to be easy. My view is that if the Conservatives manage to form a government with the support of the DUP, either a formal coalition or with the tacit support in Parliament, that means that actually they'll have to take a strong position on Brexit, on a hard Brexit. I think that this favours the hard Brexiteers within the Tory party. And after all, we should remember that Theresa May called this election to get a freer hand to make compromises in the negotiations, and it was always the case that with a small majority she would be beholden to the Brexiteers in her party. So I think I wouldn't assume. I also can't see that Theresa May has any credibility going to Brussels. She may not resign today, but I think it's only a matter of time, and I would expect that Brexiteer would be the next Prime Minister.
Stephen Barber, can she hold on, and if so, for how long?
Yes, she can for a while, I suppose. I mean, she seems to have signalled this intention to remain as Prime Minister, and of course it's her constitutional right to remain until such a time as Parliament signals that it no longer has confidence in her government.
The Brexit negotiations are so important, and without that mandate, which she said she needed, her position is very weak, isn't it?
Very, very weak. I mean, she started this campaign emphasising her strength and stability, and she's ended it looking rattled and indecisive, and without a mandate.
Those in favour of a hard Brexit, or those who'd like to see something else, a softer Brexit. What do you think about that?
Certainly, I mean, if she has a small majority, and in fact she doesn't have a majority at all here, but with the DUPs, she manages to get a majority in Parliament, it strengthens the 25-30 or so hardline Brexiteers in that sense. But she doesn't have that mandate. She doesn't have that authority to go to Brussels and negotiate that kind of hard Brexit. So it's a two-edged sword.
Joan Hoey, for those watching and wondering, about Brexit and whether it's going to happen, I mean, is that a given that it definitely will happen according to the timetable, however messily that process might be?
Brexit is going to happen. There's been the vote. There's no way there's going to be a second referendum. I don't think that's on the agenda at all. So Brexit is going to happen. There may be a question mark about the timetable, and obviously this introduces a lot more uncertainty into the process, and I think it also raises the risk of a breakdown in the talks, if my interpretation is correct, that this gives greater power to the Brexiteers.
So anyone in Europe, any politicians in Europe thinking that maybe this pushes Brexit into the long grass, well, that's wishful thinking.
Again. Yes, they can think again.
Stephen Barber, just in terms of how we've got here this morning, I mean, what went wrong for Theresa May? She was riding high in the polls just a few weeks ago.
She was. I mean, one of the main reasons she called this election was that she was facing and looking at a 20-point opinion poll lead, and she's kind of thrown it away with a poor campaign, a campaign that didn't seem to have very much material to it, beyond this idea that she was strong and stable. There was big mistakes with the so-called dementia tax, and meanwhile the opposition Labour Party, which had appeared to be in a sort of state of almost terminal dysfunctionality, ran a pretty credible campaign.
Joan Hoey, just final word from you. Is that the big surprise of this election, that Labour, that had been sort of written off under Jeremy Corbyn, have done much better than anyone expected?
Yeah, you've got to give Jeremy Corbyn credit. He's faced down all his critics in the media, including in his own party, his own MPs. He ran a good campaign. He came across as authentic and honest. He's mobilised the youth vote. He had a bold manifesto. It's a tale of two leaders, this election campaign. Theresa May, whose campaign has been disastrous, too many U-turns, the triple whammy in the social care, the triple lock and the winter fuel, no doubt lost her votes. And she was robotic and lost the plot, really.
Joan Hoey of the Economist Intelligence Unit, Professor Stephen Barber of London South Bank University, many thanks to you both.